Hi everybody and welcome to this edition of Capricorn Radio. Our aim is to discuss topical science, ancient history and historical mysteries in an effort to unveil our true cultural blueprint. Before I start today's show, I just want to give a quick plug in for the website. You can log on to capricornradio.com where you can subscribe for show releases and news updates. You can also follow the links there for Facebook, YouTube and the podcast channel. All shows will be archived on Capricorn Radio, and please get in touch if you have any comments or guest suggestions. I would certainly love to hear from you. Today I will be discussing the work of John Anthony West and his work as an independent Egyptologist. His book Serpent in the Sky became a sensation when he unveiled water erosion on the Sphinx, and he's actually best known for his work on The Mystery of the Sphinx, which won a News and Documentary Emmy Award. He's also produced an 8-hour documentary series called Magical Egypt, a Symbolist Tour. John works as an author, lecturer and guide in the realm of Egyptology and has produced decades of fine scholarship. His websites, if you want to check them out, are jawest.net and jawest.com. Of course, you can check out all the guests on the guest biography page on Capricorn Radio's website. So I have with me now on the line from New York, John Anthony West. So without further ado, let's get our guest on to the show this evening. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, John.
Why, thank you. And as a Cancer, I understand that we're in opposition to each other, so we'll see how it goes.
We certainly are. As we said the last time we spoke, Cancers are unique little breeds, yeah?
Well, so are the Capricorns.
So are the Capricorns. Well, actually, the show is actually named after two little special Capricorns in my life.
Oh, really? So, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was you. Okay.
No, not me. No, but
yeah.
So yeah, before we get into the nitty-gritty, John, of ancient Egypt, just for the listeners that aren't familiar with your background, just give us a little bit about yourself and what brought John Anthony West to become an independent Egyptologist, as you were called.
Well, some people call me. I call myself a rogue Egyptologist, actually. And it's a long story that I will cut much, much shorter. And that is that at the age of about 13, I understood what then very few people understood, but now lots of people are beginning to understand, that I was born into a lunatic asylum. And it was a very lonely place. I mean, I realized that all of the stuff that I was being taught was worthless. I didn't know what was worth, but I knew worthless. And by the time I was 19, I knew what I wanted to do. I was going to be a writer. And my objective was not scholarship. That was far from my mind. I wanted to be the little boy who said the emperor has no clothes. I wanted to say, hey, all you out there, you're nuts. You're living in a crazy house. Don't you understand? But anyway, so that's what I started doing, writing, and I started getting published at about age 25. But all of my early work was not scholarship. It was novels and plays and film scripts. And once I started getting published, I had a lot of things published. Nothing ever made any money, but basically it was satire. It was raucous satire, and very, very negative, but very funny. And then when my first short story was published, that was 1957, I was wildly in love with a woman who wouldn't have me, thank God. And I was working as a copywriter in an advertising agency, which I was very good at, but I hated. And even though, as advertising agencies go, it was pretty good. It was run by a nice guy and it was doing book ads, but I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And so I headed off for Europe, where I'd been for a year and a half in the American Army, 53, 54. And I found my way to the magical island of Ibiza, which you may or may not have heard of. That wild place. Well,
wild for sure. Still wild.
It's still wild, but it's no longer really a bohemian arts colony, as it were. But then it was sort of like a medieval island version of Paris in the 20s, with a lot of people who said they were writers and painters, but really just drunks and drug addicts. But quite a few who had some real talent. And anyway, I found my way there, and there I stayed for ultimately almost 9 years. And it was there that I learned about ancient civilizations, and I understood it earlier, but didn't really articulate it. When I was in the army stationed in Germany, at one point I found my way to the Cathedral of Chartres, in a November early morning, and I went to this place, and I always thought that religion was complete codswallop, that it was absolute rubbish, etc. Except, I have to admit, except for the music, when I didn't, the B minor Mass and the Monteverdi's Vespers. So there was something going on that didn't seem to have any relationship to what was normally religion. And anyway, I walked into the Cathedral of Chartres on a November morning, absolutely alone, empty, all by myself. And I understood that somebody knew something very, very important. But again, I was a kid, and I didn't, it was an epiphany, but I didn't know enough to try to follow it up. It wasn't until I got to Ibiza and started getting interested in these esoteric ancient subjects that suddenly it registered, that's what it was back there in Chartres. It was, I experienced sacred art of the ancients, and this was something of tremendous consequence. And anyway, once I got to Ibiza, then I got interested in these things, and I was working on other things, on plays and a novel that got published that was almost a big movie, but didn't end up as a movie. And one thing led to another. I got first interested in astrology, then in the Gurdjieff work. If you're familiar with Gurdjieff, or if you're, he was, if I had to pick the most important man of the 20th century, I'd say Gurdjieff, even though not that many, a lot of people know about him. He was a teacher and a wise man and a prophet and a joker. One of the most, I missed him by a few years. He died in 1949, and very interesting indeed. And one of the things that impressed me when I first came across his work was that he was the only person I'd ever met, albeit posthumously, who was as contemptuous of Western civilization as I was. But the difference was that he knew how to live in it, and I didn't. And so anyway, I got very interested in that, in his work, in the system, in his teaching. And when it was finally time to leave Ibiza, I'd been there for 9 years, and it was time to go. It was getting all touristed up, and I'd learned everything that I could learn. That's not really true, but anyway, I'd had enough of it. And it was time to go somewhere. I wanted to get in the school, in one of the schools that was teaching Gurdjieff's system. Well, in those days, now we're talking 1966, there was Paris and London and New York. Under no circumstances did I want to go back to New York. Paris, my French wasn't good enough. My first wife was not yet my wife, whose name was in fact Katie Dolan, was an actress. And the idea was to go to London, and she'd act and I'd write, and somehow or another we'd make a living. So anyway, we did go there. I got involved in one of the Gurdjieff groups, and I had my first novel published there, and the editor was very opposite me in temperament and philosophy. He was he was a mathematician, Cambridge-educated mathematician turned publisher, because he could make a living as a mathematician. And one day we were in a pub having a jar, and the subject of astrology came up, which is what got me initially interested in all these subjects. And he said, astrology, that's a bunch of codswallop. And I said, well, no, as a matter of fact, it isn't. I know a lot
Something
about
I firmly believe in too, like.
You know something about this, and there's a lot of evidence, some of it direct, but a lot of it indirect. And if you put it all together, you'd have a case for astrology. And he said, well, that's really interesting. Would you let me see? So I brought in the documentation, and he said, well, that's fascinating. I never knew that this kind of thing existed. Would you do a book on it? And my answer to that was what it generally is pay me some money, I'll do a book on anything, which is not quite true. But by this time, I was much more interested in other aspects of the ancients and astrology, but still it was an interesting book to write. And it was actually reasonably successful. And I rewrote the whole thing back in the 90s, but it's out of print now. But if you go online, if you go to Amazon, you'll find copies of it. It's The Case for Astrology, and you'll want to get the old one was published in London, I guess, in 1969 or so. I rewrote the whole thing in 90 because there'd been so much new things, so many more new developments. Anyway, so you'll find that was also published in England. If you go to Amazon, you'll find used copies. Well, yeah, I mean, it goes back the first. It starts with what I call my first publication. I was rather good about this. People, even as a youngster, if people said, what are you doing? What's your life? I mean, what do you do? I would say, I'm trying to write. When the first short story was accepted by a very, very good, now defunct magazine, I could then say I'm a writer. So that's a big moment.
Of course, everything's different nowadays with your Kindle versions, and you can have your book published within minutes. Like, it's so different nowadays. Like, so.
Yeah. Well, completely different, but that's a good thing in a way. I call the self, and I'm about to republish all of my old stuff. Much of which has gone out, but it's all there. The novels and the plays and all kinds of stuff. The ability to self-publish, I call the Writer's Emancipation Proclamation, because we're no longer subject to the whims of the editors and the predators and the bean counters. that we can do it ourselves.
As I was just telling you, I've actually just been down that route myself. Like, so yeah, I've had first-hand knowledge of that. So just on the book, then, The Serpent in the Sky, that's the one that really set it all off, John, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, backtrack a little bit. So, in England, working on this first nonfiction book that I'd ever done, which I never intended to write nonfiction ever, and suddenly there I was with a contract to do the astrology book, and one of the people in my Gurdjieff group suggested, because I was working on the history of astrology, which I knew in the gut was not what the academics call it, or that as Chaldean, Babylonian superstition made rational by the Greeks, but that it was something very, very ancient and actually very, very important. It was not what modern astrology tends to be, particularly pop astrology, which is, what's a good day to buy a poodle. No, it's not about that.
I read a lot into Alan Oken, if you're familiar with Alan Oken.
Yeah, I am, and I forget, I don't know where.
Myself and my fiance read a lot of Alan Oken, but yeah, it's very hard to get good material, John, on astrology.
Anyway, it's there if you look. And in doing the research, somebody said, you got to go and get this book called Herbach, and Herbach's Disciple, a novel in two volumes by a woman called Isha Schwaller de Lubitsch. And so I got a copy of that book. It was only available at Watkins, which you're not old enough, but Watkins is still there. Do you know Watkins?
I've heard of the name Watkins. I think they're still running.
That was in fact, I think it was the only esoteric occult bookshop in London at the time. Now I'm talking about 66 or so, 67. And so I went there, and sure enough, they had a copy. And it was a horrible novel, but the picture, because it was written by somebody who didn't understand what it takes to write a novel, it was just it was fascinating ideas of symbolist Egypt disguised as a novel, which was in a way a big mistake. But a lot of people think that if you put interesting ideas in novel form, you'll have a bigger audience. Sometimes that works, but you have to be a novel calls for something else. A novel needs a certain amount of emotional integrity. You can't just cloak ideas in people. They become wooden caricatures. Anyway, this fascinated me, and there were lots of footnotes in the book that kept on referring to Le Temple de l'Homme, the Temple of Man, written by R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, who was her husband. And finally, I bit the bullet, and I realized that I had to go see what this book was about, and made my way to the was it London Museum? No, what the hell do they call it? Library.
The British Museum Library, I think.
British Museum, yeah. To the ground room there.
It's quite a big library, isn't it?
Oh, huge. And I had, I could get access to it through my publisher, because I had my novel published, and a book of short stories before that, actually. And
yeah, I think they keep a copy of every book in the country there.
Yeah, but this was from France, and they had a copy. They did have a copy. The book was published. Temple of Man was published in 57. This was now 67 or 68, and nobody had ever taken out the book, because in those days, I don't know if you know this, French books in those days were not cut. In other words, you had to cut the pages yourself, which was sort of like literary baptism. It was kind of a thing. Would
you believe I've got some rare books, and I thought that I didn't know that. And I've just wondered why two pages were stuck together. And would you believe I've just clicked? I've got some old copies of E.A. Wallace Budge.
Really?
I've got some rare copies up there. But I just found some pages stuck together, and I went, "That's strange. It must be a mistake."
It is. No, that's how they.
That's old school, then, John. That's really old school.
So you learn something every day, and I just now taught you something. So anyway, here was this huge book, 3 volumes, with the pages uncut. In other words, nobody had taken this book out in 11 or 12 years. So I cut all the pages, and it wasn't. Yeah, but I like that. It is a ritual. As I said, it's a ceremony, and if you by now I had a lot of things published. So if you're a professional at anything, you make intuitive, informed judgments. If you're a professional athlete, you watch somebody on a football field, hit the ball, kick the ball once, and if the guy can play the game. If you're a violinist, you listen to somebody play a scale, and you can really judge if they know what they're doing. Well, in this case, this enormous book, I cut all the pages, and I just went sort of like this, ripped way through, and I realized that this man had done something of immense importance, that he had reformulated the true science of the ancients, which is not superstition or anything like that, and put it into a context that was accessible by the 20th century Western rational intellect. And I mean, me as a writer, creative guy, it's not just a rational intellect. I know how to combine my head and my heart. I do it instinctively. I've been doing it all my life. Anyway, so and my French was pretty rudimentary at this time, because the book was in French, of course. But I just stopped what I was doing on the astrology book, went all the way across London. We lived the hell out in Tagon and Ealing. And
yeah, I've lived there as well.
Ealing?
Yeah, I've lived in West London for a couple of years as well. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a bit out, like. Definitely.
Yeah, it's way out there. I mean, you have to get to the last stop on the tube.
It's probably not too bad now, but in your time, when you had the tubes then as well. So.
Oh, the tube was there. Yeah, it was just a long trip all the way to Russell Square. And I just stopped for about 10 months with the dictionary at my side, working through this impenetrable book, which is now translated into English brilliantly. It's a wonderful translation. But it's still impenetrable. I mean, Schwaller is not easy to understand. But anyway, I then put, even though it didn't belong in the astrology book, I had a long chapter on Schwaller, and publishers then came to me and said, would you do a book on Schwaller? Because nobody in the English-speaking world knows this. And I said, you bet, because that really interested me. And then 6 years later, out came The Serpent. And then that led, in doing the research for The Serpent, I came across this one line of Schwaller in one of his ancillary books, now called Le Roi de la Theocratie Pharaonique, translated into now Sacred Science, the King of the Pharaonic Theocracy, in which he's talking about the chronology of Egypt, and the Egyptians themselves believed that their civilization extended much further back into the past. And so Schwaller put together this long chapter citing Greco-Roman era sources where the different writers who percolated down to our day with fragmentary works and so on, talked about this, the priests, the Egyptian priests, telling them this. And there were several Egyptian, one of a stone stela, called the Palermo stone, because that's where there now is, and another fragmentary papyrus called the Turin papyrus.
Sure, I'm glad you brought that up.
Where the Egyptians themselves talk about these earlier long periods or times where Egypt is ruled first by the gods themselves, the Netzeru, and then by the Shemshahor,
the followers of Horus. That's right. I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Of Horus. And then at the very end of that, well, it was all very interesting, a long chapter in this book. And at the very end, Schwaller throws out this line. And of course, the Great Sphinx of Giza shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion, exactly the translation of his words. But basically, the Sphinx has been weathered by water and not by wind and sand. And I realized suddenly, it was my little epiphany, that that's science. Either it is or it isn't.
Yeah, that can be proved. That can be proved one way or the other.
You can't prove a textual argument. There are better and worse arguments about Shakespeare or about the Bible or whatever. That's not science. But geology is science, so either it is or it isn't. And, oops, hold on a sec.
You're okay. I'll just take a break anyway, John. We're just going to we're coming up now for a break, so we'll just pause it right there and we'll be back in a minute. We're back on the line with John Anthony West, with your host of Capricorn Radio, Mr. E.A. James Swagger. Welcome back, John.
Why, thank you, James.
So we were just talking about the lead up to Serpent in the Sky, and I guess you had the foresight and the intuition to follow the evidence that Schwaller de Lubis had, cryptically wrote in other languages for your discovery, should I say? But
see Schwaller's Symbolist Egypt. I regard, and I've done by now a lot, decades and decades of scholarship, and I regard Schwaller as having written probably the most important work of pure scholarship in the history of scholarship.
Sure, and I'm glad you say that, because if you look at the alternative history that personally I think is more accurate than what the Egyptologists have thrown out, and yourself obviously agrees with that. But when you look at the handful of people that are really out there chiseling away at the alternative history, you can't get past you, John. You will have to beat you somewhere on the road, and I guess before you, Schwaller de Lubis is the guy before you. So you really have become a bit of an expert on him, I think.
Well, I have. I'm one of a few, but
one of a few, I should say. Yes.
But it's funny, you see. It really is. It really is funny. It's a parallel. Oh, I'm absolutely certain that as long as anything survives the chaos that we're in, that it will be understood at some point when the quackademics have been put to rest, that this is the real history, that the civilizations, the ancient civilizations, not just Egypt, but all of them, were in command of this profound science that has degenerated over the years and has allowed the Church of Progress to take over. So, and I'm instrumental. I mean, I sometimes call myself Schwaller's self-appointed Boswell, because
I was going to say, if he was alive today, he would want you as his publicist.
Yeah, because he was. Well, that's right. Because he was, like many very great original minds, not a great communicator. Yeah, it never occurred to him that he was talking levels above the comprehension of practically everybody.
And he was a multidisciplinary type of guy. He had several skill sets. He was chemistry, mathematics.
Well, chemistry, mathematics. He was a practicing alchemist, after all. So not many of those floating around these days. But anyway, it's a bit like Galileo and Copernicus. It was Copernicus who rediscovered the heliocentricity of the solar system, but it was Galileo with the big mouth that popularized it. So that's sort of me. I haven't done that much. I've done a little bit, but not that much original Egyptology. Basically, my function is to
interpret. I guess what you do. I think that sets you apart from the different researchers, John, is you're providing us, with the public that is, with a fascinating and an accurate way of interpreting Egyptology to this idea of symbology that you have learned through Schwaller de Lubis.
Yes, but the other thing.
That's fair to say.
That's fair. The other thing that distinguishes what I do from the others, some of whom are actually more erudite than I am, but I'm a writer by trade, so I can make it interesting and comprehensible.
Words are your tools, John. Yeah, words are your tools.
Some of the other guys can't, because I'm a writer first and a scholar by default. Anyway, back to Schwaller. So there he was. The Sphinx is weathered by water. It took another 10 years before I got hold of Robert Schoch. When my book first came out, it acquired a bit of a kind of an underground scholarly reputation, but of course was trashed or ignored by the quackademics. And then I found Schwaller about 10 years later. It took a hell of a lot of doing to get him over to Egypt. He was very skeptical to begin with, which he should be. That's fine.
That's a good thing sometimes. That can be a good thing.
Absolutely essential in scholarship or in science.
Skeptical but open mind is a good thing.
Well, I mean, the people who call themselves skeptics are actually debunkers. They're not skeptics. A skeptic is somebody who needs, what's the definition? Who questions. And you have to question. If you don't question, then you believe any goddamn thing. If you're a debunker, then you don't believe anything other than what you already think you know, which is just credulity. Anyway, so once Schoch came on board and got convinced that this was indeed water weathering, which in turn meant that all of history, on the basis of that observation, all of history has to get rewritten. And it's in the process of getting rewritten, actually.
I've got Dr. Robert Schoch coming on the show in a couple of weeks too, as well.
Oh, you have Schoch on? Oh, great. Okay.
I'm going to have him on, and he's got the flu. He's just back from Egypt himself.
I didn't know he had the flu.
Him and the wife have got the flu, so I just got a message there yesterday. But hopefully get him on the show in a couple of weeks as well. So, but let's back up there a second, because you had quite a clever trick, John, which I think is just genius. That you covered up the head of the Sphinx and you showed the body with the erosion, and you went around to geologists.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you,
Let's tell that for the listeners, I guess.
Sure. The son of a very good friend of mine from Ibiza, a wonderful poet named Jack Beeching, and his son was a marine biologist working at, I can't remember if it was Cambridge or Oxford. And anyway, I was just on to this whole idea of water weathering through Schwaller. And I needed some sort of, I'm not a geologist, so who do I ask about what water weathering looks like? So I said, I think I can get you an interview with there was a well-known Oxford geologist, and he got me.
I think it was Oxford, yeah. I think you said Oxford.
I think it was Oxford. Well, I said Oxford. I might have forgotten. I don't know. Or I might have put it down wrong. As I said, as a scholar, you should be really meticulous about references and stuff like that. Schoch is. I tend not to be, so I can make mistakes that way. Anyway, so I got an interview with him, and he was very cordial and a bit standoffish. And I said, okay, well, what I want to know is one question. Can you tell the difference between water weathering and weathering by wind and sand from a good photograph? And he said, well, generally speaking, yes. And so I then said, do you mind if I play a bit of a trick on you? And he said, well, no. And so what I had done is I'd covered over the picture of the Sphinx, an old one where you could really, it's because it's been repaired and re-repaired, where you could really see the weathering. And I covered over the paws and I covered over the head and the haunches. So all you could see was an expanse of weathered wall, no repairs, no anything. And I said, well, what do you think that is? And he said, well, unquestionably water weathering. And I said, And then I pulled off the masking tape. It would have been a good job. Pulled off the masking tape. And he went, oh. I mean, he was really astounded. And
sure. And what was Robert Schoch's reaction to that then initially? I know that, did he want to get on board? Did he want to get on board straight away, or?
No, that's another long story. He didn't want to. It's a very funny story. And Schoch and I are in a moment, we're about to start working on a book telling the whole story of this mystery of the Sphinx. It's a big, long story with lots of stuff going on. It'll be an interesting book. No, well, he got interested, and then he didn't even want to meet me. He wouldn't. The go-between was a guy who taught English at Boston University, who was interested in my work and had taught at Cairo, American University, Cairo. And he came up to me one day, this is the middle 80s, and said, the Symbolist Egypt seems to me very important and it ought to be better known. Is there anything I can do in my position as an academic to help? And I instantly said, I haven't even thought about this before. I said, yeah, find me an open-minded geologist to look into the water weathering hypothesis. And I laughed. And he said, why are you laughing? I said, well, finding an open-minded scientist is like finding a fundamentalist Christian who loves his enemies. And he said, oh, wait a minute. There's a young guy teaching at my school. He's young, but he's got 4 books published. He's got all the credentials. And anyway, for years, my friend was reporting back, well, he's very skeptical, but he's interested. But he wouldn't even tell me his name. He said he didn't want to talk to you until he's up for tenure. And I realized that was fair enough, because if you're up for tenure and your peers think that you're looking into the A word, Atlantis.
Yeah, it's a dirty word. People don't like it in the academic world. It's a dirty word.
They think you're looking for that. You're not going to get your tenure. So this was fair enough. As soon as he was up for tenure, then he said, yeah. And then I gave a talk at Boston University, and that started this whole long process. But anyway, once Sharp was on board, and once we went over to Egypt a few times, then he became absolutely convinced, as he is now, and put tenured neck on the line. Without him doing that, it would still be it would be, nobody would pay attention to it, because I needed that academic background. And now, of course, this is when I first read that in the late 60s. 40 years have gone by, more than 40 years. And yeah, more than 40 years chasing up this theory. But now, one thing and another, there's Les Granton, there's all of this, the new findings in Turkey and Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that as well. So
we're about to break that paradigm.
Yeah, I think Göbekli Tepe is the potsherds that they were crying out for. Yeah, it's just a pity, because I watched that today just in before the show.
Before.
And Mark Lehner was talking about just debunking the whole geology theory, which was basically trying to debunk science, but quite childish and just dogmatic and ignorant. Just where's the potsherds? But it's just unfortunate that Göbekli Tepe wasn't at the stage it is now, where it's been unearthed and researched, and I think it was just being dug out of the ground or just discovered at the time. When was the geology debate with Mark Lehner?
That was earlier. It was 90. Yeah,
that would have been before.
It was 92.
92
or 90, yeah, 92, because the documentary came out in 93. Göbekli Tepe was discovered
the year after, probably not long after.
94 or 95, but nobody knew about it until about 10 years later. They just didn't say anything about it, and they wouldn't have known. Actually, see, they had to do a lot of digging to expose, and you have no idea how slow this goes.
Yeah, they've only got 5% of Göbekli Tepe.
Exactly.
I'm actually going to Göbekli Tepe in about a month, if I can swing it, all being well, because that's a real hot toddy at the moment. Yeah, I just want to get a good. I actually have been before, and it was a flying visit, but I want to get back with my camera equipment this time and get some good photos. But yeah, and I know Robert Schoch's been there as well, hasn't he?
You've been a few times. We both have. I've been there, but they won't let you video.
Yeah, the stills I want anyway. But yeah, they're funny like that.
Well, they're not funny. They want to. If there's, I don't blame them. They unless you're got the backup, the BBC or you're a university.
You got a press card.
They don't want to give their stuff away.
Yeah,
I don't blame them.
It's the exact same at Newgrange Passagegrave in Ireland. You can't take any photographs inside whatsoever.
Not even photographs. Right?
Not even a photograph. Although people just on the quiet, people do. I have some photographs myself of the inside. I have to say I've took a few,
but Newgrange has to be pretty well documented.
Yeah, it's just people. I think
there can't be anything new at Newgrange to see unless you discover something that they don't know about, right?
Sure. It's just the novelty of taking pictures. I think people want. But so yeah, let's talk about the Magical Egypt, a Symbolist Tour documentary series. Because for me, John, I'm just so happy that you did that, because it's an archive material. 8 hours long, is it? I think there's 8
episodes. Yeah,
8 episodes, 1 hour long, and there's so much information in that, John.
Where did you find it, James? Online? What?
A friend of mine gave it to me as a box set.
It was a box set, really?
I actually got it as a present. He said, I've watched it, and I went, and I watched it once, and I went, I'll just keep watching this over and over. And my fiance goes mad when I watch it, because I just go mad. I just watch something over and over. Same as the Pyramid Code. I just watch that over and over and over, because it's fascinating to me. Like, and there's so much information in it that you might just forget some of it now and again.
Well, you do forget it. I forget it.
Sure, it's such a complex thing, but you did hit so many different subjects too, John. And I guess my favorite episode would have to be the Temple and Man, and the layout of the Temple of Luxor and the body,
I think so.
The body parts.
And also, you see, well, difficult to explain.
Just briefly,
you really need the visuals there. That the Temple of Luxor is constructed. Its proportions are exactly that of the ideal or the average male skeleton. Each major section of the temple corresponds to that section of the human body. The leg from the knee to the foot, the upper leg from the knee to the pelvis with the midsection to the
womb, the lungs,
and then all of the rest of the stuff, wherever
the optical center, the pineal gland,
the top part for the higher centers, pineal and hypothalamus, and so on, and then the symbolism. It's not as though it's supposed to be a reproduction of the human body, but it's that the human body, in its various endocrine systems and nervous systems and blood systems, is literally a model of the universe. In other words, we are what Schwaller called the anthropocosm, the man universe. So all of the functions and principles that guide the genesis and the maintenance of the universe are in us. And if we understand ourselves, we understand all of the rest of it. And our job as human beings, we have a role in humanity, and that is to within ourselves become little universes with all of these incredible things going on. And I mean, it's very difficult to put it into a couple of sentences, and
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that Schwaller brought to the table, and which you basically interpreted as well, and outlaid it in a better writing style, I think, because, as you said, Lubis was a little bit he would be off-putting to the average reader, if you wanted to say that.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, he didn't even, as I said earlier, this happens often with really great original minds.
Yeah, talented people, they don't have the outlet.
They don't understand, and they're not writers. To begin with, communication is not their genius. Their genius is discovery. So they need, Copernicus, well, he knew smart enough to say nothing, but I forget the dates, but I don't think he knew Galileo. He was dead before Galileo came on the scene, but he needed somebody with a big mouth to.
Sure, it was nice reading The Serpent in the Sky as well, John, because you have the literature to associate with that documentary series, where the diagrams and, as you say, the visual aids, the breakdown of the breakdown of pi and the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio and the doorway, and it's nice. It's nice to see all that. Like,
well, as I said, I mean, I'm a writer by trade, and with the Magical Egypt series, I mean, that's the genius of my partner in that, Chance Gardner, who's put together. I mean, this is already 10 years old, and it's a marvel of editing and the way that things flow. I mean, really, it's
a very good production. It's a very good production, I have to say.
It's done on a shoestring. I mean, with absolutely no. Yeah, he did it all himself. It's really an amazing thing, and we never made a bean out of it because everyone steals it and sticks.
Yeah, I think the internet's full of it in broken sections.
You can watch I know it's just horrible. And I mean, this is the internet is a great invention.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it's got its downsides too. I mean,
it's downsides.
Copyright.
I don't know who the hell it was that decided that stuff should be free. It shouldn't be free. I mean, no. I mean, everybody who uses it for free works for a living, and they don't not work for nothing.
I actually had brushed up on the documentary as well, just for today's show, and I forgot about the episode with Michael Schneider and the ancient mathematics.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yes.
Because I love maths. I'm just the engineer and the physicist.
Of course.
There's certain sections of that would appeal to my brain, but
right, well, sure. Oh, yeah.
Well, well, I mean, no, people, the average people that just hear about Egypt, and unless they get into your work, John, really, they don't know how sophisticated these guys were. I mean, the ancient mathematics is as advanced as ours. I mean, they were working at binary mathematics. They didn't need to learn math tables. They literally had a different method of doing it.
And what's more, when you play with it a little bit, you can do it all in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. That's and complex things as well. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Once it looks complicated, the quackademics.
But once you understand the methods, Yeah.
And if you're pretty good at it, I mean, not everybody can. It's a gift if you can. Let's say if you can do let's say multiplication or division in your head. That's hard to teach. Either you have it or you don't. I had that. I'm not an engineer or anything like that. I could never get through algebra. It was completely mysterious to me. But geometry, I could do almost without even knowing what it was about. It was my nature. So I used to be able to, at a very early age, do three, complicated multiplication and division in my head. If you can do that and work with Egyptian mathematics, it's very simple.
Yeah, it's the idea, getting your head around the concept and the idea that they did things a different way. And I think when we all grow up in school, we're brainwashed with the modern method. And it's always perceived that it's that way or no way. And that Western civilization, as we call it today, is really the only way that we can evolve to a highly sophisticated society. But, that's not... It's the opposite, I think. Yeah, I think we
have to get rid of this bullshit in order to be able to.
Sure, I think we're degenerating. We're definitely. Michael Cremo would talk about us degenerating, I think. But
yeah, well, very much so.
Let's because this is something that appeals to me also is the engineering artifacts that you're talking about these green schist vases that you're talking about in the Magic of Egypt. Sure, right. I mean those are just fascinating, John.
Yes.
I mean,
how did they hollow them out? That's right.
How did they hollow them out? I mean, you're talking a very narrow neck and then hollowed out on the inside of very hard material as well.
And there are some even more extreme than that, and I don't know where they are. I've not seen them. I've seen pictures of them that look like a laboratory flask, that goes like this.
Really? Yeah, they're quite big. Yeah, they're quite big as well.
And so they've got to get something down that thing to hollow it out from the inside.
Engineers just boggle the mind at that. We boggle the mind at the pyramid as well, but we kind of like to see the artifacts because they're more of a smaller task to figure out, if you will. But
there's no figuring it out. Even recently, do you know about the obsidian bracelet?
I haven't heard about that, but there's some obsidian. I haven't researched some obsidian artifacts, but I haven't heard about the obsidian.
Well, this is in the last maybe 6 months or so, and it again comes from Turkey. Göbekli Tepe's in Turkey. Turkey's going to end up as a treasure trove of evidence with this ancient, sophisticated technology. They found somewhere, I don't know where, somewhere near Göbekli Tepe, an obsidian bracelet about like that, and they dated it to, and I'm not sure, I guess by the strata it was found in.
Of course, obsidian's very hard and hard to polish as well.
Obsidian is a volcanic glass that's extremely hard to work and extremely hard to polish, and it's a very delicate bracelet. If you Google up obsidian bracelet Turkey, you'll find it. And here's this elegant, very simple looking bracelet, and they noticed when they started studying it that it seemed to be very perfect. And so they looked at it very carefully for the tolerances and discovered that it was done with tolerances to like a 10,000th of an inch that you could only do nowadays with the most sophisticated machinery. And while they were at it, they noticed that it was geometrically, even though it looked simple, very sophisticated, and they realized that it was very sophisticated geometry, and the dating is 8,000 BC. So this means, this is awesome. Well, it's one of these little things. This means that there's a sophisticated geometry and a technology that to reproduce today would require the most sophisticated devices, machining devices that we have. And presumably they didn't have such devices. They somehow did it by hand.
You've just reminded me of the ancient Egyptian lenses that exist as well. There's ancient crystal lenses from Babylon as well, which
Babylon,
have
Egypt, yeah.
And there's some in Egypt apparently as well. But they have some perfect geometric form. Yeah, they don't like to display them as well. You're familiar with the trilobed schist disc as well? What they call a lotus flower vase, I think.
Yeah.
That one boggles the mind as well. I think the Egyptologists call it a lotus flower vase.
Well, I think it is. It's not. I know about that. You have to watch out.
Yeah, I'm a bit curious because
it's not. It
looks like a wheel, but it's
sort of to go multi-dimensions or some such bullshit. No, it's not. It's a very elegant piece of work.
Regardless of anything, it's very elegant, very delicate,
carved
made out of
stone.
Made out of fragile stone, yeah.
Very fragile stone, but it's not. It is not perfectly symmetrical. So if it's supposed to be some sort of a device that whirls around, it's not going to do that because it's going to.
Because I was in the Cairo Museum before and I didn't see it there, and apparently they had moved it and put it back.
Yeah, I don't know where it is nowadays either. It used to be there in plain view. Actually, James, you're going to have to come on one of my trips.
I think I will, John. I mean, I've been to Egypt 3 times, and I just wanted to actually tell you because I have never made it to Dendera. After 3 times I was there, I was with other people, and it was closed at one time for some reason, and I've never been on the Nile cruise anyway. And I just had actually just kind of just jumped at the last minute, but Dendera is one of the places I haven't been to, or Abu Simbel. But it's just I had also watched that in Dendera you talk about what is it, the womb, the Hathor column, and the womb of Dendera. That's the genius of John Anthony West again, because you just wreck your brain trying to figure out what this all means.
That's the genius of John Anthony West being willing to listen to other people, because I didn't figure that out. No, I knew that it was a puzzle. I knew I couldn't understand how, none of the gods and goddesses of Egypt have a column to themselves. The columns are always papyrus or lotus for particular good reasons. And then there's this Hathor column with a shaft, and then this extraordinary head of Hathor on the top of it. And I could never figure that out. And then Dendera is where the new year is born. That's
the zodiac's there, the
zodiac. It's not a beautiful temple because it's Ptolemaic, it's late and it's corrupt, but it's a very important temple and it's got a lot of power to it. And anyway, so I was always puzzled by this Hathor thing. Why should Hathor, the strange, un-Egyptian looking face with the high cheekbones and a triangular head and the cow's ears, why the devil should she have a column to herself? Okay, she's the great goddess and the cosmic mother and all of this, but you don't see an Ammon column and you don't see a Ra column. Hathor has a column. And so anyway, on one of my trips, I was talking about this is a very dark place, the Dendera, and people have, it's one of those temples where people have usually very strong reactions to, one way or the other. Some love it. My colleague, my great pal in Egypt, Mohammed Nazmi, who runs my trips, who runs the tour company, he loves that place. He could stay in there forever. Initially, I found it really dark and oppressive and almost scary. So it elicits those kinds of emotions. And then at one point, again, quite some years ago, I was talking about just this little conversation, and one of the women in the trip who was an artist said, "Oh, well, yeah, well, of course it's dark like that because it's meant to be a womb. It's the womb of time where the year is born." And I said, "Yeah, that's got to be right."
Yeah, it makes sense when you superimpose the image, it clicks.
Right. And then you can see. I was looking for something like the Temple of Luxor, where the actual physical construction of Dendera corresponded to the womb, to the woman's reproductive whole system. I could never find that, but maybe it's there. I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't figure it out, and I didn't know who to ask to check it through. But then years later, 5 years ago or so, we were with my group, and we're there in Dendera, and I'm giving just the story that I just gave you now, and we're in one of the halls, one of the chapels of Dendera, and there's a statue of, not a column actually, but a relief that looks like a column of this triangular face with the cow ears of Hathor. And one of the women who was with me said, "Oh, well, John," and she was a mother of triplets actually, so she knew a bit about birth. And she said, "That face represents a womb." And I said, it was one of those.
Penny has dropped, as we say over here.
And the next day, I went to the local bookstore. There's a good bookstore in Luxor, and got a book on Egyptian medicine to see about womb symbolism and stuff like that. And then there's also this relationship of Hathor with the cow. And so in this book on Egyptian medicine, they had a picture of a cow's skull. And I realized that was exactly what a womb looks like. But the face of Hathor is much more triangular. And then on the subsequent trip, someone said, "Well, yeah, that's a pregnant womb." And then I have another friend who was
so you're elaborating the theory as you're going.
So, well, that's how the stuff. So it's not me being a genius about such things.
That's the intuition to look and explore and put things together.
Intuition, yes, it's this informed intuition, because stuff comes across my desk every day. I get 10 different pyramid theories, but it's not that I'm right all the time either. But it's this informed intuition. So when somebody comes up with something, I have the ability to put stuff together. Yeah,
to listen, to put it. John, we're just coming up to a break now. We'll just get back into that when we come right back. And we're back on the line with John Anthony West, with your host, EA James Swagger, on Capricorn Radio. Hey, John.
Hello, James. It's been long since I talked to you.
Cool. So, look, John, we're going to be coming up to the top of the hour very soon. So I just want to wrap it up. And I guess I kind of want to talk to you about recent happenings in Egypt too. I kind of wanted to finish with that, I suppose. Zahi Hawass has gone out of Egypt now. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, he's not gone out of Egypt, but he's gone out of his position.
Right.
I don't necessarily count him out.
Yeah. Is that a good thing if he goes, or a bad thing? Or does it really matter? Is it indifferent?
I'm not sure, actually. Zahi has been very opposed. It's funny. I mean, very vitriolic about our work for a long time, and he's still in public, except he's not in public that much now. Very opposed to it. But personally, we sort of buried the hatchet some time ago, and on a personal level, get on quite well. And I don't know about the new guy. I understand that he's basically a sort of an academic. Zahi was a showman, and in a way, the devil versus very much. But I wouldn't be surprised, depending on what happens in Egypt, if they realize that he's more of a plus than a minus, and because he was a great spokesman for Egypt.
He was, and I mean, he was very worried about the tourism as well. But I can understand that. But I think you would probably be an Egyptologist's worst nightmare, John. You really would, because I mean, when you went at them with the Sphinx, you were trying to. You were trying to give them their civilization. I mean, personally, I think it adds to their civilization. It adds to it.
The others are worse. See, I've always thought, in fact, but now I might not be able to get a chance to tell that. See, Zahi's not a scholar really. He's a field archaeologist, and he actually didn't understand how good our evidence was. The other quackademics, Lehner, for example, they know. I mean, they know they can't answer it. Zahi would just bluster and so on. But I always felt that if the situation were right and the evidence were presented to him in a way that he could finally get it, because sometimes you hear things a million times, and at certain times, at a point, something drops in the slot. I don't know about you, but I've had such experience lots of times. I don't get it, and I don't get it, and I don't get it, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, there it is. Anyway, I always felt that Zahi, under the right circumstances, would get it, and if he did get it, he'd have the guts to turn and say, yeah, these guys are right. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think
case not closed.
It's not closed yet, no. But I mean, I think you just. I think they have suffered a lot too, because if you ask me, I mean, since that whole theory has come out, a lot of people have absorbed that. Other authors have it. The alternative history viewpoint now, certainly with Graham Hancock and Underworld, ancient cultures, yourself and Robert Schoch with the dating of the Sphinx. That's been absorbed into a lot of other people's writings now. So I do think that's very much a turning point, John. Definitely, and and it's of course that will obviously take maybe 10, 20 years, and that's had that now to soak in, and now you have Göbekli Tepe, so we're definitely in changing times. Yeah,
I think Göbekli Tepe, both Schoch and I regard that as the turning point. That's the smoking gun. They can't argue. See, after the Sphinx came, Mystery of the Sphinx came out, the argument was, well, we don't care about the geology. It's impossible because it's all hunter-gatherers back then. Now you've got Göbekli Tepe, their guy, Schmidt, who's actually as archaeologist.
It's not connected to you in any way. It's another independent.
Not really connected. And here they are with this tremendously sophisticated, elegant site that they date to 10,000 BC or earlier. That means that if they can do that, they can do the Sphinx. And they can't use that argument anymore. And then the geology comes into play. And then now they're in trouble, actually, because it won't be long now. I sometimes compare the Egyptologist and archaeologist position to a little town in Russia, walled city in Russia in 1220 AD. And every once in a while there's this crazy horseman who wheels up to the gates and says, submit and pay tribute, or you're going to be annihilated. And they say, oh, bugger off. We couldn't care less. Go away. And off goes the horseman. And 3 years later, Genghis Khan is at the gate. And he says, yes, the horseman has told him, if you don't submit tribute, your walls are going to be razed to the ground, and all the men are going to be killed, and all of the women carried away and ravished. And so 3 years later, there's Genghis Khan at the gate, and the walls are ravished, and the guys are killed. And now it's not quite, the analogy doesn't work anymore, because they don't ravish the women, because they're all Egyptologists, and they're not attractive enough to ravish.
But that's the thing, though, John. I mean, it's not that you guys needed that Göbekli Tepe thing. I mean, the Egyptologists needed that to wake up, basically, and go, look, now we've nothing to come back at, so...
Yeah. No,
that's the thing.
It's not that they realize anything, it's that they're beaten into the ground, because they don't get it, and they're never going to get it. And some of them are going to go down with the ship. As I said, I always thought, now we won't get a chance to find out, I always thought Zahi could turn.
He's a strange one, Zahi. He's a strange one, yeah.
Strange. Yeah.
You would never rule him out, definitely. And I hear a lot of people say that about him.
He's a very powerful personality. And you don't
I heard mixed reports whether he's in Egypt or out of Egypt.
I hear that too.
Yeah,
well,
I think Dr. Carmen Bolter said he was in America, but he could be coming backwards and forwards for all.
Well, he might be, but for sure, he's not going to be in the position that he was in with this big fancy salary from the National Pornographic Society as their in-house.
Okay, John.
You know why they're the National Pornographic Society?
Probably because they sell themselves.
No. Because when I was a kid, which is a long time before you were a kid, the National Geographic was the only place that would publish photos of naked women.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. They were black. They were tribes. They were black.
I got you.
If you were a 14-year-old boy,
you're hilarious, John.
Look at a naked woman was to have a subscription to the National Geographic.
Well, Zahi has had a long-running relationship with the National Geographic.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I think the fact that he's gone is good in one respect because you had a lot of closed doors with Zahi there, and
I'm not the least bit sure that there are any less closed doors in there.
Yeah,
I haven't met him yet, but I understand he's an academic, and a bureaucrat, and I have no particular reason to think that he's more open than any of the other guys. And Zahi was a showman, so that if the story was spectacular enough.
Yeah, he could have been out to save Egyptology too, but kind of he might believe what you're saying. He might actually believe it. He might actually see the evidence for what it is.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't.
He's blind to it.
But I'm not pretty sure. But I think that at just the right moment he could turn, whereas the others.
Yeah. He has it in him to turn. He definitely has it in him to turn.
Whereas the others will go down with the ship, it's a standard in science of people. Even when the evidence runs against them, they'll stick with it till the end.
Sure, I always tell people when they ask me about Egyptology and alternative theories, and I always say Egyptology is not a courageous field. It's just certainly not. Look, John, we're at the top of the hour. It's been so great talking to you and so informative. So just give us a quick plug out for your website. That's going to be jawest.net. Is that correct?
.net or .com.
Or .com.
Or .com and
you can get your books there and your tours and up-to-date information.
We should actually, just a bit of a word about the tours, that by default, as it were, there are only a few people in the world capable of transmitting Schwaller's Symbolist Egypt, and I'm the only one who does tours. And so, really, I like to say that if you don't see Egypt through symbolist eyes, you don't see Egypt at all, and I'm the guy who does Symbolist Egypt.
You're the guy that does that, John. Yeah, definitely.
And I tell good jokes, too.
Well, look, I say to the listeners, if anybody's going to go out and see Egypt and you want to do it in style, definitely with John Anthony West is the man to do it. So listen, John, thank you very much so much for coming on the show.
Wait, 1 second, and there's a trip coming up March 20th to April 2nd this year, and it's not full, so anybody wants
There's still places left on that, okay, and that's on the website, jawest.net, if you want to get in touch, or jawest.com. I'm going to have links on the webpage for Capricorn Radio too, John, for your full biography and for your webpage, so the listeners can get it there as well. But again, thank you for coming on the show, John.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye now.
There you go. That was Mr. John Anthony West. What a wealth of knowledge he has. If you're going to go on a trip to Egypt and you want your eyes opened, he's the man to do it. If you haven't checked out his work before, please do so. He's really unveiled such fascinating evidence surrounding the Sphinx and symbology of ancient Egypt. So check out his websites at jawest.net and jawest.com. That's all for now, folks. I got Chris Dunn, Maurice Cotterell and Shannon Doherty next week, and I'm hoping to have Dr. Robert Schock in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned to your host, Mr. E.A. James Swagger on Capricorn Radio. And don't forget to subscribe, everyone, for the latest updates and show releases.